what soccer did when I came to this town, because like I said, we lived in Chicopee in a small apartment, and then we came over to Ludlow. Uh, it gave me friends, so I wasn't alone, and I got a lot of acceptance out of it. And I realized at a young age that that was what would get me more friends, is being good at sports.
All right, so today we got our first episode of Roots. We're here with Mikey Lima. Welcome.
Thank you.
And today we're going to talk about sort of Mikey's life and where he started from, his journey from what I would say is pretty successful in your soccer career,
Yeah.
making it up to pinnacle of most of us, and kind of where that led you next, and how sometimes we may stumble, trip, fall, but that doesn't mean that's the end of our story. We pick back up.
Yeah. Yeah, so my name is Mike Lima. I am from Ludlow, Massachusetts originally. I grew up there. I had a pretty good upbringing. Both my parents stayed together. Ironically, my mother's African American, my father's Portuguese. Their backgrounds back in that time, I wouldn't say were, they clashed a little bit, but at the end of the day, they stuck together through everything. And, I'm very grateful that I had parents that showed me an example about what the tough times about marriage and getting through that and sticking with things. Because it instills certain behaviors and certain lessons when you look back at it, about how not everything's going to be easy. But, if you still stick with it, and if you still keep going, then you get the reward eventually.
Yeah.
With a little bit of faith. My father was a very, very good soccer player growing up. He's in the Ludlow Hall of Fame, in the Westfield State Hall of Fame. He was on the East Region soccer team when he was younger / high school. That means that he was basically one of the best players in this whole entire Eastern Hemisphere. My mother was a sprinter, and she holds a record at classical high school. Which, both my parents were fairly good athletes, and my father told me that the second that I started walking, even before I could walk, he threw a soccer ball in front of me, and I just started kicking it. He said, "I knew you were gonna be lefty." Like, from the moment. It's like it was just inside of me, and it's. I love hearing those stories, and I even have pictures when I was a kid, kicking it with my left foot. My dad was a hero. He was like my hero. I have a son. His name's Max, and when I hang out with my son, I always envision that being me, and then my dad, and just I understand the way that my son feels about me now, because it's the way I felt about my father. So, with that said, I grew up playing hockey and soccer. I was good in both. Yeah. But I got to a certain standpoint where hockey was fairly expensive. My parents didn't make a lot of money. Before we moved to Ludlow, we lived in a very small apartment in Chicopee. And when we moved to Ludlow, soccer is by far the most popular sport there. And I shined in that. I did still play hockey, but I got to a certain point where my father was just like, "This, it's really expensive, and you're far better at soccer." I always played up an age or two. I was smaller always than most of the guys that I played against, and I learned to play the game at a high level. My team, we were one of the best Ludlow teams to ever come out of that town. Yeah. As far as record wise, I mean, we would win finals 6-0. We'd just demolish everybody. So my father took our team and put us into a Maple League, which is basically the the best league gets in Massachusetts. I think they had different names for it, Super Y, Premier. Even with all local guys, we were in a few state finals, playing against teams that had collectively the best players from all over the state. But we did it with a local team. So, that should show you how talented a lot of the players that I played with. And I was fortunate because I played with very talented players as well. As I got a little bit older and they got a little bit stronger and bigger, I had like this little gap period where I didn't grow that much and I was still very small, and I had to learn how to play the game from, without using my, physical presence, because I didn't have any. I eventually got to a point where, I grew, caught up with everybody else. And then I started to see myself around, 15, 16 years old. I was already playing with men, indoor, outdoor. And, I started to see myself actually dominate against them at like 16. So I knew I was good. I just didn't know how good I was. And you don't really find out how good you are until you start playing against like some of the better players in not just your area, but when you go out. I played for the Mass ODP team. And we went to this cup. It's called the Ryder Cup. We qualified for that. And I was noticed by this coach, Ed Tremble, who was also the coach of the Eastern Region team, just like my father had played when he was younger. I was chosen for the national team pool when I was 17 years old or 16 years old. And I played caps against Canada, Bermuda, and Trinidad and Tobago. And, it looked like I had a bright future ahead of me. And I did. I played on 2 state championship teams. One of them was undefeated. I lost my senior year, and that haunted me for a long, long time. But I lost to a very good Cathedral team. That also had some very, very good players on it. And ironically, one of the players on their team, we ended up joining back up in college. And me and this kid were enemies. His name's James Thorpes from East Long Meadow. Funny, right? So my enemy in high school, kid that, me and him were always the top scorers in every league that we played. And he actually was also a fantastic goalie, and he was recruited at Franklin Pierce, one of the top goalies in the country. He played 2 years there. I was playing at Elms College because my SAT scores were not good enough to get into any of my Division I offers, which was at UC Santa Barbara, University of Hartford, UMass, UConn, University of Maine, New Hampshire, most of the big ones that are out this way in this region. Santa Barbara was obviously in California.
Yeah.
I had opportunities to go there, and because my grades weren't good enough, kind of squandered away.
All right, so you're talking about sort of your grades and your upbringing in the Ludlow school system, which, yes, for those who aren't familiar with it, Ludlow is fantastic at soccer. A lot of times we like to think other towns, East Long Meadow, I'm from here too, so we like to think we're good, but I think Ludlow has something about it, the charisma, the characteristics of the actual game itself. It's just taught differently. It's embedded in the minds to just be better all the time. And so I get that. I understand, like, your priority was to be better at soccer all the time. So now we fast forward to these potential universities that are scouting you, but now the grades coming away. Mm-hmm. And so tell us about that.
I was, later to come and find out, I don't blame things on mental health disorders or problems that some people may say. But I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 30 years old. It was the first time that I ever had to sit down and read something, and that's when I actually realized that I could never focus fully on anything but sports or things that interest me and I would hyper focus on those. But when it came to the mundane tasks in life, even to such things as cleaning my room, car, stuff like that, it was just something that I just never gained grasp of or cared about doing. Same thing came for school. And I'm not going to blame it on that. I could also say that I was a tad bit lazy, but let's just say that I'm an only child, and what soccer did when I came to this town, because like I said, we lived in Chicopee in a small apartment, and then we came over to Ludlow. It gave me friends, so I wasn't alone, and I got a lot of acceptance out of it. And I realized at a young age that was what would get me more friends, is being good at sports than getting good grades. I got into mischief, but I never went over the top. I was just an average kid, you know. I knew what to do and what not to do.
So let's talk about that. So your parents, how do you think they kind of, if some issues came up, how would they address that? Were they aggressive? Were they passive aggressive? Would they talk you through certain scenarios?
No. So my parents were both raised. My mother's father he's an African American that came out of the 1960s. He's hard.
Yeah.
He was in the Navy. My grandfather's a very intimidating man, and you could see it in the pictures. He's got forearms like this. Now he can't walk, but his forearms are still like this. It's like Popeye. My grandmother was a very Christian woman, fully invested in God and her kids. And my grandfather was, he's a serious cat. Like, he don't joke around, and people were scared of him. I remember people being scared and intimidated of him. He owned his own construction company, so he was a contractor. And he did his own for his kids, and so he was a very hard-nosed kind of guy. My father's father was very much the same way. He came over here from Portugal with his brother when he was 18 years old, and his brother was 11. Left the parents down there. My grandfather worked to the bone until he was able to afford for his parents to come live over here. So my father was also raised with that kind of iron fist mentality as well. So I was never spared of the rod, for better terms. But one thing that my father, no matter how much trouble that I had gotten into, one thing my father never took away from me was to be able to play the sport, because it was one of the only things that brought him, it made him proud. I was good at it, so why are you going to take that away? But my parents were both, my father was fairly hard on me. I had, times where, I'm not saying I had to play a perfect game, but my father was also my coach, and mistakes, I heard them every time. But part of that is what made me such a good player as well, because I learned things from my dad about how to make myself better, and the work ethic that my father instilled in me. The more that you put into the game, the more that the game will give back to you. And I practiced all the time. 7 days a week I would play soccer. I always had the ball at my foot, especially when I was in my later high school to my college days. And even now, people will see that when the summertime's out, I get to a place where I got some free time. I'd much rather go out and kick the ball around instead of going to the gym or do a lot of things. And it's kind of like, it's so embedded inside of me that it almost becomes therapy in a certain way. I still have that same mentality. And that's why I'm still able to play. I'm 38 years old. I still play with kids that are 21, 20. I won my first summer league when I was 20 years old. I was summer league MVP. And I would never, ever allow a 38-year-old to step on the same field as me and do to me what I do to them. And I think you've seen this firsthand, correct? Yes, you have. So that would never happen.
Oh, that's